what we looked like and the way we worked. And we were quite lucky in that first 3 years of, through our own personal networks, being able to reach out to people and have them join. But as we scaled and got further along, we could see the challenges, both finding the talent as well as having the talent thrive once in the system. And that's a big key for us with Valence, is actually providing resources for once people are actually in, that they don't feel that isolating freeze moment, and that they have support across and outside of their organization for mentorship and growth opportunities. So it was a huge learning ground in both speed, velocity, but also culture. And that's a big part of what we're trying to do.
Love it. All right, Joanna.
Hi, I'm Joanna Popper. I'm with HP. I lead up our initiatives around virtual reality, especially with regards to entertainment. I've been at HP. Seems like people are getting awards over there or something.
Yeah, definitely.
It's like that's where all the fun is.
I'm going to go get mine after this.
Okay, good. All right, we got to do a lot of applause here too. Come on.
Woo!
Okay, good.
Nicely done.
Yeah. All right. If they keep doing it, we'll give it back. All right. We'll do like a pep. Was it like pep rally?
Yeah, pep rally.
It'll be a pep rally. All right. So I've been at HP almost 2 years. It's been a really fun adventure working at a company with such a storied legacy. I don't know if everyone knows the story of HP, but we were one of the original companies founded in a garage in Silicon Valley, 2 founders creating technology for Walt Disney for the movie Fantasia 80 years ago. So we weathered the storms of the different phases of computing. We see VR, AR, AI, 3D printing as the next wave in computing. And so for us, it's really important that we're in there building out the technology that's gonna take us into that next wave, when we no longer have the cell phones that you're so graciously pointing at us and filming us with, and are using some sort of smart glasses instead. So that's what I've been doing in HP. With regard, HP is really interesting with regards to our focus on representation and diversity and inclusion. We actually have the most diverse board in all of technology, which is really proud to say, and a lot of focus on making sure that our senior level executives, everywhere from the interns all the way to the senior level executives, are representative of our audiences, our customers, and who we're working with. So that's been really nice to be working for a company where the goals, the values align well with my own personal goals. And I can talk more about initiatives and things that we're doing on that front. Prior to HP, I led media and marketing at Singularity University, and before that, I was at NBC Universal leading marketing for Telemundo for almost a decade, so for a long time in
Joanna's
entertainment.
who I want to be when I grow up, basically. And one of the things she just kind of glossed over is that she's working in this interactive and immersive space, and obviously, with respect to entertainment in particular, the landscape's still a little fuzzy, right? Trying to figure out where the big economic opportunities are. But one of the things that we're seeing as a space where we've made some headway in terms of quality experience and also monetization is location-based entertainment. Could you talk about that just a little bit?
Sure. So location-based entertainment, just to define it first, is basically anywhere you go out of home to be entertained. And so it could be a theme park, an arcade, a movie theater, a museum, a mall, standalone VR arcade. So location-based entertainment has been around for quite a while. As a concept, it's not new. What we're focusing on is using virtual reality or augmented reality in these venues. And there's a lot of reasons that the venues are turning towards new technology. I mean, if you think about it, they've always been turning to whatever that newest technology is to drive customer satisfaction, to drive revenues, to drive traffic. And so today, one of those experiences or some of that technology is virtual reality and augmented reality. There's a lot of projects that we've worked on, from Dave & Buster's, who rolled out in 112 locations simultaneously a Jurassic World, basically motion platform simulator in VR that gave you the feeling of being in a roller coaster. But as the Dave & Buster's had said, it was giving you a roller coaster, but not at roller coaster prices. So they were able to create a virtual experience that you have going in. Basically you sit like the way we're sitting here. Let's look like this. You put on a headset, and you encounter this virtual world of dinosaurs. And so we worked on that project from the computing side. We're working with a company called Zero Latency, which has about 40 locations around the world, A lot of fun zombie shooter games in there. A lot of they also have really interesting trippy games where you feel like you're upside down, kind of messing with your state of equilibrium, doing in the way that only virtual reality could. And then we also work closely with museums that are bringing in the type of content that would draw traffic into museums. So, for example, we worked with the Saatchi Gallery in London and Marshmallow Laser Feast for a piece that was giving you the experience in virtual reality of really being connected and being one with nature. So, in terms of what the content is, it runs the gamut. But the reason that the venues are turning to VR is that they think it will increase their traffic, drive maybe potentially younger audiences or different audiences, more profitable audiences, or that extra amount of time that you'll stay there, you may end up spending more money on food or spending more money on drinks. There's a couple of great ones if everyone's from LA, or there's T-Bit Circus, which is really close to here. We're working with them. They're a micro amusement park. They're using some of our technology. Then Dreamscape, which is at the Westfield Century City Mall. You can go under water in a scuba diving experience in VR. You can, there's one that's sort of like a Raiders of the Lost Ark, and they have a new Men in Black one coming soon, and we're working with them on the headsets as well. So lots of great experiences. And why location-based entertainment is important too is that for most people, it's likely to be your first great VR experience where you, just for the price of a ticket, you have the opportunity to go and check out this new technology without having to make the commitment to buy it, bring it home, figure out how to use the technology, troubleshoot it if something goes wrong, and figure out which content you want to see. And
So
it's social.
Well, first, editor's note. The zombie shooting game shouldn't be called games. That's training for the apocalypse. Just so everybody
We have
do that. The second thing is
now we know
right?
how you spend your time
Right.
on the internet.
The second thing is, just out of curiosity, how many of you have a high-end gaming console at home, like PS3, PS4, Xbox One type thing, right?
A bunch of people.
Now, keep your hands up. Keep them up. Now, keep them up if you use it more than 10 times a week for something other than streaming content. Right. So
now we found the real gamers.
Right. Then we found so one of the issues, just like when I was a kid and folks would go to arcades to play Pac-Man and Donkey Kong, is that the value proposition for the average consumer around, will you get the equipment in your home to have the really high-end experiences, right? That is a tricky thing for a lot of households right now to justify the spend when you just don't spend that much time in your home engaging in those kinds of experiences. So when you perceive like I'm going to spend $500 or $800 to have the equipment to do it, it's much more likely that you spend 10, 30 bucks, know what you're going to get first of all, and have the highest end equipment when you go.
Yeah.
Right?
And you're also having that fun with your family or friends or whoever you go with. So
Right,
it makes it a social
home.
experience.
Although for those of you who are socially awkward, maybe you do need to be at home, but that's a separate conversation. It's a different panel. I think it's over there, hence the clapping and everything. But anyway, Chris.
Woo! 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 I'm just hoping my ankles aren't ashy. So my name is Chris Denson. I host an interview series called Innovation Crush. The show has about 750,000 subscribers on it. I turned it into a #1 best-selling book that came out last year called 10 Essential Rules for Breaking Essential Rules, which is pretty much a handbook for how innovation happens within organizations and within individuals. Kind of almost 50% personal development as much as it is like business tactics. And then on the other side of my hat, I get to work with a lot of brands and startups and government institutions to help them do innovation and make that happen, whether that's putting together think tanks or working as an innovator in residence. And prior to that, I had actually run the innovation practice for Omnicom Media Group for 4.5 years, working with folks like HP. They were one of our primary clients. I'm also an avid fan and user of Valence. I don't know what you do. No, I'm just kidding. But we'll get you in the mix soon. And then, no, just like, my goal is really to help people increase their innovation potential. So no matter what level you're at, like there's always a new game or a new level to achieve. And so whether it's a novice speaking at colleges and things like that, or working with folks like an HP or GE, just to kind of like, what does the near and distant future look like? And that encompasses a lot. So I get to see the world through a very wide-eyed lens and kind of connect dots in sorts of behavior patterns and technology growth and all sorts of different interesting things.
So one of the things that people often ask me about when we talk about future casting is how you hook enterprise executives when they're more concerned about dollars and cents than the next wave of technology, right? Like we're at a point now where there's a better mousetrap being built all the time, right? So getting people to focus on the particular innovation that might really impact their business can be tricky. Can you talk a little bit about how you've been able to do that?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is controlled experiments, right? You know, if an organization can put a person or a resource or, some effort towards experimentation with the future, I'll give you an example. At OMD, there's 12,000 employees around the world. There were 20 of us focused on innovation. And that was broken up between 3 different satellite offices, so New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. So it's a very small bucket when you look at the whole thing. But the impact means that, hey, if State Farm, who spends $800 million a year in media, spends 20 on this weird VR experiment, or, hey, we saw this thing that's happening in culture, let's see how that goes. So it's encouraging leaders to have an appetite for experimentation and know that and also building in safety nets. So anything that we would want to do this sort of newfangled, I guess, we always tried to support it with something that was tried and true. We did this whole 4D VR experience for Warner Brothers a few years ago. But we also built in social media to it. So we had cameras mounted in the experience, so you could see yourself being blown around in this tornado, but you also got a shareable video. The shareable video is the thing that everybody's familiar with. 4D VR sounds crazy. So how do you get them to dip their toe in the water with something that they're familiar with, but also stretch a little bit further?
Love it. All right, and last but not least.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Eric Elder. I'm a media arts consultant working in the fields of animation, video games, XR. I have a balance between working in production and helping to optimize pipelines, mostly at studios, and also on the education side. I spent a great deal of my career training people to work in the spaces of animation and video games, mostly founded one of the first bachelor's degree programs in game art and design, game production at the Art Institute in Santa Monica close to 20 years ago. So we were a bit ahead of the curve, also a game programming degree. Currently still a professor at Loyola Marymount, teaching courses like VR Studio this semester, and I've also created a class on world building where I work with the students each quarter to kind of distinguish, what makes Game of Thrones, Harry Potter, Walking Dead, worlds that people engage in, and then I actually work with the students to create a world every semester. Also really focused on the continent of Africa right now, working with a client in Nigeria that's a tech entrepreneur. He's building an innovation center there, and he's working on his first mobile game. So we're really looking at how to grow the industry in Africa. Last year games made $140 billion globally, and Africa only accounts for less than $1 billion of that. So it's really the last big emerging market. So just having a lot of conversations there on how to work with teams there and be prepared to take advantage for that.
So first, world building, all the stuff related to the kind of VR, game production, et cetera. How do you teach that? What do you start with?
Yeah, so we start off with basically looking at what are the biggest, most popular, profitable worlds, and we actually do a deep dive into one aspect of those worlds each week. And then also we basically distinguish what are the different elements that it takes to create a world. So food, religion, there's an amazing thing that happens when you're creating a world just when you make a map. All of a sudden it's tangible, it's real. And so how do you go about doing the ideation on that? And how do you work as a team to do that? And then the theory is basically if you build an immersive enough world, then content kind of organically emerges from the world. Characters, stories, you can create all kinds of content, video games, role-playing games, tabletop, the possibilities are endless. And this is what's interesting is from an academic point of view, it really hasn't been a serious area of study. These things have happened. Like when you go back, you look at things like James Bond, you look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe and where it is now. There wasn't an intention when these universes were built or created that they would extend 50, 60, 70 years down the line and have all of these different elements come out of them. So right now, students actually have the opportunity. It's really important for them to learn the skills because most likely they're going to be doing some type of project like that in their career at some point.
So and with that, I want to take the second piece that you were talking about, which is the gaming piece and emerging markets, and tie it back to this is Mobile World Congress and open it up to the panel. Obviously, when we get to 5G, we'll be talking about having experiences at your fingertips that nowadays require kind of a tethered connection. It seems to me that one of the obvious opportunities in terms of entertainment is going to be interactive and gaming and so on. But can you guys just talk about some of the opportunities that you see, on the horizon, next couple of years, 2 to 5 years? What kinds of cool stuff do we think folks are going to actually have available to them, and what do you think are going to be the real business opportunities there?
I'll start. I think one of the most exciting things I've seen in relationship to 5G is, what Magic Leap is working on, and this idea of, again, I'm a big fan of location-based entertainment. I was thinking this morning, you look at like Ready Player One movie, right? It's really interesting when they talk about people being in a world with headsets. It's not the same as when you see it like on screen. Like it just seems weird, and that people would be walking around on the sidewalk with a box on their head, right? But these glass eyeglass formations that are being developed, that seems a lot more reasonable, right? And so just the idea of going to like a mall or an amusement park or a big space and having some type of interactive experience that's layered on top of reality, where people don't look so strange, and that other people are engaged with, and that it becomes kind of like a normal thing, opens up an amazing opportunity. Like I'm really excited about the Quest as well, and just being untethered and running around in a 60 by 60 space multiplayer is exciting. So you can, thank you. Hello, testing. I don't know if it's on. You could just imagine what that's like on a larger scale. I'm thinking of games that 30, 40, 50 people are playing in a large space.
I advise everybody to watch a lot of porn. I say that jokingly, but it's also like if as far as like consumer consumption goes, they are early testers in every field of technology. First with encryption, first with VR, but it's just something, not necessarily watch it per se, but like keep your eye on it.
The industry.
This is the first time uttered at Mobile World Congress, watch pornography. But also I look a lot at the mobility space, right? I was in Germany at D Mexico a few weeks ago, and I opened up my Google Maps, and in there was like a small AR box, right? You start to think about proximity, and you go and travel to a place, and you don't know what's around the corner or what's down the street. And so I wish, for instance, if I'm a Hilton, Diamond member, that part of my Hilton app experience lets me know what's around me locally. So while you do have the gamification and the game experiences, you also have this sort of like utility. And then I look at all the other boring fields. You look at the medical industry, and you look at where the spikes are in certain fields of technology. Even holography, for instance, is being used a lot in medical schools, right? You want to see what the endocrine system looks like. Now we can actually like have a 3D model of it right in front of us while we're doing the assignment or working on the cadaver or whatever we're doing. So I look at these other areas of interest, and spike, and mobility is just such a big thing right now. If you look at what's happening with the last mile and the whole scooter business, there's a company called Canoe that's coming online, which is a subscription-based electric vehicle that runs off of an app. BMW a few years ago was experimenting with pop-up holographic displays in the windshield, and they have a vehicle that was on the market that you could have that inside your vehicle. So these things that kind of just help me and enhance my day-to-day and give me that one last bit of information or resource or connection. Those are the things I look at like that are going to be exciting that 5G will allow us to do a little bit more extensively.
There's a lot of areas. There's, you mentioned cars, so clear self-driving cars will have huge impact. Smart cities, huge impact. On the gaming side, we focused on a more high-end experience. So we create these really cool headsets that are the 2160 by 2160 per eye. It's called the HP Reverb. Now, today, that still needs to be tethered. And so we have a PC backpack that you can wear and move around freely, so you feel like you're having a whole free roam experience. We just released our second generation of the backpack. It has RTX 2080 inside. So that allows gaming creators, content creators, as well as training, healthcare, architecture, engineering, and construction, product development, higher education. We have lots of industries that want to use VR, but don't either want to have the storytelling ability that you wouldn't be able to have in just a standalone headset, or the resolution. They don't want to have a sort of cartoonish looking character when they're trying to do a training for, say, oil and gas or mining or first responders, because they want it to look as real as possible when you're talking about training somebody in what could become a life or death situation. And so today, that needs to be tethered, and so our backpack connected to our headset is the best way to have that very high-end experience. And that's because of the bandwidth that's required for that very high resolution and for everything we're doing. Going forward, there'll be a point where we'll start seeing first local 5G. It will start with local, and then it would go broader. But that's something that we're looking forward to have the technology and those high-end experience that we're doing be able to become more pervasive.
The other thing when you talked about these high-end entertainment experiences and the autonomous vehicles and so on, one of the big shifts that we don't talk about enough, I don't think, is the fact that with the rise of autonomous vehicles, that's going to free up a lot more time for commuters to engage in some of these experiences, right? So thinking about how some of this stuff is going to end up being implemented in vehicle, so that when you're, sitting with your driverless Uber going to work, you'll be able to have some of these experiences too. That's going to be game changing, right? Yeah. One of the things that we see in terms of consumption nowadays, there are more screens, there are more things to do thanks to social media and video on demand, and you see this spike of how much time people spend in front of a screen. But increasingly, we've kind of maxed out the amount of hours, for example, that you can spend watching a movie or playing a game, because there are some things that can't be multitasked, right? But if you just add 2 hours a day, that's a completely different situation. There's a question about how to monetize it too, because increasingly with these on-demand entertainment type experiences, you don't necessarily have an easy way for brands to engage with consumers without interrupting the experience. Yeah. Right? So thinking about that too.
There's a couple of things I want to say about that. So there's an experience today at Universal City Walk with a company called HoloRide that's spun out of Audi. They're a German company, and they launched at CES last year, and they were showing a Disney Marvel experience on the racetrack. And you would sit in the back of the car. So the driver in the front, it was not in a VR headset. The driver in the front had full view of the road, but you as the guest would sit in the back and be in a VR headset and drive around the track. And they matched the experience on the track to the game. So as you turned, you were like, saving the world for the Avengers, essentially. And they were actually going 90 miles an hour because it was on this Vegas speedway. And it didn't feel like it. It was super, super cool. So now they just launched a week or two ago here in LA. It's every Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday at City Walk. It's actually free. So you just show up at, Monday to Wednesday, now until November 9th. And they worked with Universal. The experience is Bride of Frankenstein. You're not going 90 miles an hour because they're actually taking you on the road. and it's Ford cars, and it's really, really cool. And again, they matched your experience, going around the corner, stopping, with how you're saving Franks. And they actually even use elements that like theme parks do, heat and wind, but from the car. So like they use the seat warmer that's in the Ford. They use the fan, they turn on. So it's pretty cool. So that's just a vision of what we might be seeing more and more of. So for those of you that live in LA, I recommend that you go check that out.
Love it.
Yeah.
For me, I think there's two big zones. One is I see the expansion of kind of some of the smaller cities with these new technologies, opening up new worlds for the younger generation and the current generations to really do things they haven't ever had the chance to do before because of latency or just connectivity deficits that they've had. So I grew up in a very small town in Louisiana, by the way, and a lot of what I was doing at the time was hacking my world with the library, right? And so I see with the reduction in latency that's going to happen because of these technologies, just really interesting startups coming out of places like that.
Which small town, by the way?
It's a small town. The pronunciation is Natchitoches.
I know. I'm familiar with Natchitoches. It's spelled like Natchitoches.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a suburb of Shreveport.
I know that. My grandparents are from Shreveport.
Yeah. There we go.
Small world. You want to ride
Smaller,
home?
right? So
I said, small world. You want to ride home?
yeah, I do.
All right, come on.
So you have that, but then you have cities like LA, right? So a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity through Gensler to work on a project with the mayor. And at the time, there was the kind of after effect of Pokemon Go. And he really wanted this notion of downtown LA to come to life. And we did a lot of studies, and the outcome was it's too early. The tech is not quite robust enough for us to have that fully immersive experience, but it's coming in the next year or so. And so actually turning literally this convention center into a new layer of experience is something we also had in mind. As the housing and other kind of aspects of hotels come online, that's going to explode in some really interesting ways. And lastly, the types of companies and the types of innovators that will come out using these technologies. One of the focus points of our platform is spotlighting people like this young kid named Idris Sandhu. He's a great innovator in the XR space, and I can just see him already doing stuff in Africa where he's bought some land that's going to have layers of 5G that are part of that experience of showing the kids what they can do with this new technology. So we're really excited about opening it up and showing people what's happening there. And lastly, the partnership that we're looking at with the Void and immersive experience, I can see as they're expanding and doing pop-ups with a lot of these technologies being the enabling factor for it to come out of their kind of well-designed mazes into the real world in a Pokemon Go-like fashion. So lots of really cool stuff.
Amazing, amazing. So I do want to get to this talent conversation, although you guys are welcome to kind of interrupt with questions. But the last thing I want to ask before we start talking about talent is, in terms of getting organizations to see some of those opportunities and capitalize on them, are there particularly things that you are doing or that you'd recommend so that folks start to embrace some of these opportunities?
Well, I'll take it to start, maybe. For us, it's, on our initial journey, it's about kind of having a very clear set of offerings and principles that we want them to acknowledge, because there's so many complex layers within the diversity kind of aspect of the pipeline. And then there's the general talent pipeline that, America at large has to contend with. And so for us, I think the conversation around making sure that, number one, on the supply side, people will actually know the people that are doing it already and are inspired to kind of leverage and connect with them to learn more and to actually do it on their own, as well as on the kind of demand side, them knowing that we exist, them knowing that other groups exist, them understanding that a pathway like Chris's is not uncommon, but it certainly is something that people should know is possible. And so our conversation with some of the corporates, as well as some of the kind of fund entities that are out there, is going to be about, there's a world of possibilities. Let's draw down on making them real for people. And so our palette of offerings is going to really focus on that as much as we can.
Okay. I also think like show and tell is fun, like and it's super effective. I mean, all the things that you mentioned like sound great, but when you go and sit and do it, like that's a completely different experience, right? And it sounds cool. You all walk out of here and be like, oh, she talked about this one thing. But the minute I give you a visceral, physicality sort of experience, and we used to do all sorts of showcases, and we still do, with a lot of different events. We just put together a 2.5-day think tank at South by Southwest for government offices. So it was like the Homeland Security, U.S. Census Bureau, NASA, but a large part of the room was show and tell. Like, I can tell you about AR and VR all day, but once you go like, oh shit, that's what, okay, it sticks. And then that person's wheels start turning. And so, and you'll find like a lot of groups will do things like Trend Treks. A good friend of mine was the head of innovation at Adidas. He would take his team out, just walk down Rodeo Drive, and not Rodeo, but Rodeo, and walk into stores and look at the wood on the floor or the lighting, or if they did have a technological display, just react to it. Because you need to have something where you're not just talking with your hands, which you find like from an innovation perspective, you're usually like, and then it does this, right? And, and you're like, So to give them something that is sticky and gives an emotional connection to the real life experience.
Just out of curiosity, how many of you have had a chance to have VR, AR experience before? Excellent. All right. Because I agree 100%. Like if you've not tried it, particularly if you haven't had the chance to try like one of the high-end experiences, it is hard to really imagine how compelling the opportunity is, because it really is transformative. I don't think really, actually, and we can move on, but I don't think that VR, AR, mixed reality has grown up yet. Yeah. I think there's still a lot of analogs to gaming and movies, and I think if you've had the chance to really experience some of the high-end stuff, there's a potential for an experience that is kind of very unique to the medium, and you don't see that very often. But I think, next 3 to 5 years, you will see some experiences that are just a different thing, right? And particularly in the experience arcades where they can use high-end rigs, I think you're going to see some fun stuff, right?
I think too where the shift is really happening. Can everybody hear me okay? Is in the corporate space is in training, right? Like the last couple of events, OC6, there was a big emphasis on Facebook, on like Facebook business, right? I was really interested to see Johnson & Johnson make their announcement about doing these, VR surgery trainings or games, right? And there's so much data already that's accumulated that XR training is, in the long term, more effective, impactful, and cheaper. Again, particularly in, the surgery simulation. Not having to get cadavers is, a pretty serious, savings for when you have to do that type of training. So I think if you look at the directory, I think that's really how it's going to be adopted. You think about how the personal computer got mass adoption, right? First it was a bunch of geeks that had it at home, first adopters. Then once people started getting acclimated to using PCs in the workplace, then they were like, oh my God, I have this at work, I gotta have it at home. And I think you're gonna see that happen over the next 3 to 5 years in the XR space as well. I think people are gonna get comfortable with having a headset or some type of eyewear, and then it's gonna be, that easier transition to having it in the home.
We work very closely with a lot of companies that are doing training, and you mentioned the statistics. I mean, they're really astounding. For an example is, some of the reports we've seen. If you read something, like you read a manual, you're likely to retain 5%. If you listen to a presentation, you're likely to retain 10%. So everyone decide what 10% of what we've set up here that you wanna remember.
Zombie apocalypse.
Well, he mentioned Walking Dead too, so we had the connection.
Acidosis.
Yeah. And then if you have an experience in VR, you're likely to remember 75%. So if you think about the ROI on that for a business, would you rather have somebody on your manufacturing floor or working on safety or fixing something or a surgeon that has the retention of the 75% or the much lower number? One of the companies we work with is in that surgical training space, and they say that there's so many studies, and I think they said something like, if you train the surgeon with VR, a year later they still have that 80% retention of what they learned, and if you train them in traditional methods, 2 weeks later, they only retain 20%, because they're not doing, VR gives you the experience of being immersed, of interacting, and in a way, it like lodges like a memory in some place in your brain. And so it's the power, the return on investment that companies will have is so strong that there will definitely, we're starting to see a lot of proof of concept, of pilots, but it's starting to roll out more and more and more across businesses. And on the medical school example you gave, we work with CSU in Colorado, and they actually have a room where they have 100 headsets set up and 100 computers set up, and they do medical school training for cadaver. What they used to do as cadavers are now using in VR, because you're saving time, you're saving money, and you're able to reuse or redo the exercises in a way that you can't with the actual cadavers.
Can I add to that with a quick anecdote?
Yeah.
So both my grandmother and my mom's uncle had Alzheimer's. So it was when you start to think about like doctors and patients and like how you understand what a patient is going through. There was a yay, my grandmother's Alzheimer's.
Oh no.
No, there was an experience I did in Chicago a couple of years ago, and you got to be a patient. So I was an octogenarian, but like I lifted up my hands, I could see my hands they were old. I was sitting at a table, and my family was singing happy birthday to me, but I could barely hear them. I had a vision block where I couldn't see, so I'm trying to look, and it was nothing more sticky, even having two relatives that were close to me, have similar conditions. I haven't forgotten, that was 4 or 5 years ago that I did that experience, and like it stuck with me as one of the most empathetic things I've experienced from a medical perspective, or just from a life perspective. So I think, even as they're training doctors, there's also like the flip is like a doctor should know what it's like to be a patient. And so you start to get better care, and I think VR and a lot of these technologies allow you to sit in different seats. And so you understand and have a little bit more of a collective dynamic of information of what it's like to be, a player or, the game itself.
I think that company that did that one is probably Embodied Labs,
Yes.
which is out of LA, so hometown shout out.
Embodied Labs.
So last question, and then I'll open it up to you guys. So we've talked about the opportunity space, and there's a lot. How do we make sure the wheels of progress don't roll right over underserved communities? What can we do to kind of open up these opportunities and get the next generation of innovators ready for what's coming?
The main thing is, well, first of all, exposure and access, right? So they got to have access to, high-end computers. Instructors is a big challenge. Like, how do you get people who actually know that come from the production space to come in and train, for just a lot of time the budgets aren't there, at, inner city schools or programs. So that's a thing. But I think most important is project-based learning, not just giving access to the technology and to the skills, but actually having young people develop and work on projects, AR, VR projects in a laboratory style setting, right? And I found that that's absolutely the most effective way is to have them do it and actually create a context. And then have that connected to industry somehow. Like, again, we're having all these big tech companies, make really huge presence of Facebook, Oculus, Google, in LA, and that's got to be leveraged. Young people have to have that connection to real world experience as early and often as possible.
So how do we do that? I mean, if I'm imagining kids in buckets,
Yeah.
and one bucket is kind of traditional public school education,
Yeah.
one bucket is private school, and one bucket is kind of extracurricular stuff, and maybe one bucket is like what people can do in the home with their families. Which buckets can we push on to make sure that they get the exposure and the training?
I think there has to be a new bucket. Like there has to be a laboratory.
New bucket, you say?
Yeah. There has to be a laboratory setting. I mean, the education from like K through 12 and college is moving. Again, I've had years of experience in curriculum development, and it takes so long to get anything approved or have anything new happen. And this space is moving like lightning, and there's absolutely no way that colleges or K through 12 is going to be able to stay on top of it or even close using the old systems that we've been using for decades that just don't work.
I would say there's probably, there's so much to be done in this space. I would say there's probably some good news, like just kind of looking at it, and there's probably some less positive trends. So on the good news, I would say that a lot of these skill sets are new. So we're not looking at, and there's few people that have them. So if you're coming in, if you learn a game engine, if you learn Unity or Unreal, it's not that there's going to be it's not so likely that there's people with 25 years experience that are already there that you're competing with for jobs. Like a lot of it is still fairly new. So anyone who has interest and even if it comes in and self-taught, there's less of a steep, I wouldn't say a steep learning curve, but there's so much need for the skills, and it's more of an open field, right? Where versus some other fields that would just be all these people that were already there that had those experience. So I would say it's still relatively new. The other thing I would say is that unlike earlier generations of computing and earlier waves of computing, where we probably saw, only one demographic in the room pretty much, or majority one demographic in the room, this is coming together at a time where you're getting people from different industries, from engineering, from gaming, from film, from TV, from immersive theater. So a lot of different industries, one, but two, it's coming at a time where conversations about making sure that what we're creating, the voices we're putting forth, the products that we're creating do apply broadly, and having many voices in the room is a conversation, so a conversation is not the same as meeting, making sure that we're having all the voices and the right people, but at least it's coming at a time where I wasn't working in computing in all these earlier waves mobile waves, sorry, but the early waves, where I don't even think those conversations were probably happening, or the consideration, right? And so even when you think about mobile and some of the decisions that were made, and you think even, there were CEOs of very powerful companies going on stage and going in front of Congress because of decisions that were made, perhaps not having people who are representative of other experiences that they might have on those platforms in the room, helping creating product or helping creating content, got us in some ways to where we are today. And I think that the recognition of that, and the recognition of some of the cultural shifts that we've seen over the last few years, I think are driving companies to realize that they need to be more representative when building products and when building content. So it doesn't completely take on the crux of your question, but I think that we're in a space that is creating more opportunities because of some of those dynamics that I just mentioned.
So I think you've touched on a piece in terms of the opportunity space, which is that the public sector and large corporations are recognizing that they need to have a more representative collection of humans working on solving. So the motivation is there. How do we close the circuit? What kinds of things, and maybe what kinds of things are folks already doing that help build those bridges, getting more represented minorities in tech, helping people in equipment. This question Eric was talking about having a lab, like a third space where people can innovate and learn and so on. Are there any of those things underway now?
I think there are a lot of programs out there that are doing a great job, and I think sometimes we want to build something new or build something inside our company rather than supporting something that's already existing. Even when I pulled up today and I saw like 8 school buses parked outside, and I was like, that's dope. I'm on the board of LAUSD's first all-girls STEM school, and they launched 4 years ago. They just had their first graduating class. Their program like that. It's almost like there's so much that we couldn't, take it all on. At South by Southwest, I think for the past 2-3 years, there's a group called OHUB And they provide scholarships to take about 100 to 200 college students from HBCUs to South by Southwest. And they have a top floor at the JW Marriott. They program the shit out of it. There's like, LinkedIn was a supporter, PayPal, just a small amount of sponsorship can get you a couple of hundred kids, a week in Austin and just get exposed to different things. I think discovery is probably like the biggest gap, right? It's like we don't know what we don't know. So if I can just show you a picture, you go like, what is that? Again, that like stickiness of an experience. So and that's just, there's two examples, but there are a lot of groups out there that I feel like are doing a good job of boots on the ground, inspiration. Because I think the conversation happens a lot. Like I'll go to Cannes Lions, and there's Inkwell Beach, which is great. It's well programmed, but it's also the industry talking to itself, right? As opposed to like being in the classroom or bringing those school buses here. Like those to me those are like equally as important as the top line conversations.
And in my observation of it as well, I'm seeing incredible swell of all these opportunities and platforms and groups coming together and or operating independently, but they're doing some amazing things. I think we're going to have a big wave of phenomenons that are going to come through in terms of some kids potentially being new entrepreneurial successes. And so the resources and the resolve, I think, are coming together pretty nicely. And the question that we're trying to resolve is when you do that, when you have those successes, how do you amplify the opportunities for those larger groups? And that comes through making. And so making sure we're telling the stories of the people who are succeeding in these brand new ways that frankly are impossible unless they're actually getting access to the tech, like he was mentioning. And through us, we really want this to be kind of a global thing as well, so that people are able to see, oh my God, like there's a kid from this part of the world that's come right in using this technology in their pocket. That's amazingly powerful. Why am I not doing that? And then they get inspired to go and do it. And so I see where that's going to happen for us.
Love it. All right. So time check. It's about 2 minutes to noon. For those of you who have lunch appointments, we can do Q&A. I know I have to excuse Joanna soon. So if you have a question for Joanna, ask it now. Hands up high if you have a question for Joanna first.
Oh,
there you go. Demetrius, lay it on us.
I hope it works.
Hi, my name is Demetrius Thompson with Global Mobile Alert Corporation, and I'm looking at you guys and I'm saying, you're not that old, first of all. So I'm looking at it maybe as like 150 years of technology experience on this stage. And is this the first time you guys meeting each other?
No.
Okay, do you guys ever plan on collaborating together?
No, I'm just kidding. I think it's always the goal. I think anytime you meet like-minded people, you always want to try to find ways to connect dots. So I think that's just an important part of like being open. I think you come to places like this and you might have a mission or like an assignment your boss gave you or whatever, but you open up your lens a little bit, you can discover all sorts of unexpected ways of collaborating.
I was wondering what's the underlying, like, what's the
Bottom line is
rationale for the question?
I would like to see you all again together, or
cool.
possibly collaborate with you in the future. I think you guys are amazing. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Nice.
Yeah, that actually taps into a really great theme that Kevin Clark, who's the reason why, along with Dr. Michelle Turner, I'm up here with you guys, is the connectivity, right? And the multiple possibilities that extend by you just connecting with people like this. And that's really what we want to be about, is an enabler for that to happen in so many different ways and spawn new ventures. So absolutely. I want to do some comedy stuff with Chris. I want to do some education stuff with Eric. I want to do something, I don't know what, but with you, some really cool stuff. So yeah, absolutely.
Notice he left me out. Next question.
We're going home with you. We're going to figure that out.
Where did Mike go? Oh.
Right, just run over here. There we go.
I've been to Two-Bit Circus. It's great.
Awesome.
Great. It's over there on the west side, or on the east side, sort of.
Side, yeah.
And it's great to expand. I know people are going there, but I know one of the questions we talked about earlier in terms of youth coming and trying to explore some of those things. I know everybody can't have their parents bring them, but is there an opportunity to have like buses come up, maybe field trips being brought there, and maybe use it as during the daytime as a place where kids could explore?
So I don't work there, so I can't speak on their behalf. entirely, but they also have a very strong foundation arm, Two-Bit Foundation, where they are working with schools and bringing, they actually were formed out of a STEM carnival. So they originally took like makers and creation and engineering on the spot around to different schools, and they would do a whole big setup, and then they'd have to take it all down. And so out of that, the idea of having a permanent structure was born. And so I know that they do a lot of foundation work, a lot of education work, and so I can't speak personally, like for exactly what schools they brought in and all of that, but I know that that's really core to their mission and core to what they're about. And if you want to chat with them, I'm happy to connect you. If you have something specific that you would like to talk with them.
I'll reach with you offline.
Awesome.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question also for the audience. I'm curious. I think we gave some ideas, and there's organizations like Girls Who Code, Black Girls Code, Grace Hopper, that brings people together. In the companies I've worked in, specifically when I worked at NBC Universal, there were programs to help advance people like director and VP level that came from the women or other underrepresented groups. Continue up that structure. HP does a lot of stuff with. We were the first one with Free the Bid, so there's different programs for different Free the Bids to bring more women in as commercial directors. And then we went from having 0% of our commercials being directed by women to 60-something%. And during that same time, all of the metrics, all the marketing metrics improved. So you see, strong business case. So there's programs for young kids, like very young kids. There's programs for college. There's programs for bringing people into the workforce. Sheryl Sandberg and Lean In just announced last week that one of the biggest issues right now for women specifically is getting that first promotion to manager. So for every 100 men that get that first promotion, only 72 women have that same opportunity. And then there's different programs as you keep going up, to C-level. But I think the questions that you all are raising around, what should we be doing and what more, and then there's always so much more, right? Until we get equity across everybody. I'm curious if there's programs or ideas or things that you're all involved in that you would like us to know about that we could tap into and continue to improve what we're doing at our own companies or our own, nonprofits or other organizations we're part of.
Hello? Yes, my name is Kevin Clark from Dakar Foundation, and I'd like to thank everybody by really, again, having a round of applause for you guys showing up today. You guys had a lot of stuff to do today. Thank you again for taking out time, especially to Jay Tucker. Our idea of putting this thing together was really to synthesize all of the organizations, all of the groups that are doing stuff, but we know there's a lot of fragmentation within all of this effort. I wanted to make sure we had one space where we can talk about what can we do to find one pilot project that we could all kind of work on together using 5G, AI, and all the other disparate and similar, technologies that are out there. One of the things I wanted to do is acknowledge some people that are in the audience, and they do represent some factions of what we can do to get better at collective impact. So I want to see if I can bring them up here real quick so that you guys know that they're here. Mia Johnson, can you please come up? Introduce yourself.
This is like an awards.
Hi, so I'll take this out. I'm taller than you. My name is Mia Johnson. I work with the Los Angeles County Department of Arts and Culture. And we've actually really been like on this new horizon of building creative career pathways for young people. The Board of Supervisors sanctioned a cultural equity and inclusion initiative that really just wanted to kind of bring together all of the folks from the different creative industries and figure out ways collectively how we can improve access and equity for young people to enter these careers. And so I was very enlightened to hear from all of you and to really know that there's an investment activity for how we can go about doing it. These young people know that these careers exist, and also to let people know that people that look like me actually sit in those seats. And so that is kind of the work that we're starting to lead, and we've convened creative industry folks, including media and entertainment, and we've actually brought together educators and those who prepare young people for the creative economy. And so what we want to continue doing is having this conversation more regularly. We've gotten philanthropists as well as our county board of supervisors behind our wings, and we really want to bring some of these thought leaders together, because without voices like yours saying that it's an investment and an interest to do this work, then the collective and public will isn't behind it. And one of the things that we really appreciate is having the opportunity to just have panels and discussions like this with young people in the audience. And so they're being able to hear from you and know that, yes, AI is actually kind of cool, and the fact that you play video games all day is actually something that could get you a career. And so this is more of an initiative right now that we would hope that would turn into action and collective action. So just plan to reach out to all of you on LinkedIn.
Well, thank you so much. I want to connect with you here today, actually. What you're doing is exactly what we want to enable here in LA and beyond. And so it's really wonderful to hear what you're doing, and thank you.
Thank you.
Valence. Yes, thank you.
Hi, I'm Redelia Shaw. I teach at Santa Monica College. I teach media production, which I say telling stories that matter because it's nonfiction storytelling. I also touch on 360 VR. I'm really interested in the MR, XR space in terms of media production because I think there are a lot of opportunities there. I drag several of my students here. I try to get all of them here to hear this because there's more to working in the sports and entertainment industry than being an above-the-line position. So my question, because I'm at a community college, is how the money in terms of getting that kind of support so that we can do straight pathways from our 2-year to possibly a UCLA or USC that's in line with careers in your industries. So I know that I teach at the Center for Media and Design, and it's a regional space, and our technology we have in that building, we can do everything from creating games to 3D, VR, make a film from soup to nuts. So we have the technology in our space. We just need the funding to create a pathway that's going to lead to definite careers and or a pathway to a 4-year campus. So any ideas on that level, I welcome. I know my campus welcomes, and we'll try to speed through the process of curriculum to make it happen. Thank you.
Excellent.
I didn't know she had a question. Hi, I'm Michelle Turner, Dr. Turner, as Lemira's referenced. And I really appreciate panels like this. I've seen over my career many panels like this with the intention of speaking about opportunities for diversity pipelines. However, my background is in tech. I left IBM in 1996. And one of the things
When
that
she was 16.
Yes, when I was 16. Did everything from coding to managing and consulting and all of this. And one of the very real truths that still we have to figure out in these opportunity spaces is how to really advocate for people of color as they move through not just entry level can I code, but can I lead? And you know, even though we speak about entry points into 4-year universities, I represent USC in this space. I will tell you that one of the hardest outcomes spaces that I look at is how to land our Black students in tech, because they don't have the same equitable advocacy, even though they are just as brilliant. And so really this is one of the things that in my partnership with Valence, you know, that we really want to push forward, that brilliance is there, but we also need the advocacy to push forward, you know, these young people so that they're not struggling in the same ways that, you know, some of their exemplars or mentors have struggled. We need to erase that. So anything that we can do, anything that I can do, that's the space that I want to be in. But I just kind of want to highlight the fact that this is a very real conversation still yet to be had. But thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to mention something that we talked about before the panel, which is how important it is to have like social events. You know, big tech companies are, you know, it's been a big conversation, diversity, inclusion, these last several years, and I think it's a lot of times it's looked at it as a very complicated, like how do we figure this thing out? And I think there's just a big, you know, to be really blunt, just having opportunities for young people of color or underrepresented communities to actually be in a space with, you know, these big tech firms, you know, Facebook, Google, and so on. And so they just feel more comfortable being around each other. I think it really does get like that simple, right? When it gets to the point where you have, you know, candidates that maybe have the same talent level, or a lot of times, I know in production and in technology, you just hire people that you are familiar with, right? Like production teams go from studio to studio, and I don't think it's anything insidious. I think it's just a matter of, you know, people being more comfortable in social spaces, and so when these opportunities come up, there's a better chance that that person that normally doesn't get the position might actually get that. So
Yeah, I would just add to that, I think organizations also need to be attractive to those candidates, right? Like we were talking about that. There's a group called Next Play, and they basically throw like networking parties, but they will also invite like the LinkedIn's and the Microsofts, and so it's just like you literally show up and it's like a nightclub, no panels, no nothing, but it's really great network. So it hit a cultural tone that was spot on, and there's a lot of efforts that have attempted to hit cultural tones correctly, and they don't. And so like now I'm like, I just don't have an interest in it. But those things that do speak to me and speak to me accurately, then I go like, okay, cool, let me investigate a little bit more, right? You're dropping the breadcrumbs that seem to make sense and become an invitation, but also just hitting the right note, because you got to remember, just like we talk about like marketing experiences and brands and all these things, you're marketing yourself from a HR perspective all the time as well. So I just wanted to add that, sir.
Right. One last thing.
I'm gonna hit.
Go ahead.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Joy.
Yes, shortest one here. Hi, my name is Misa Ram, and I actually work for a company called Superfly. Our background has been in experiential marketing, but really we're best known for starting Bonnaroo and Outside Lands and doing experiential events. One of the big initiatives that we have from a corporate strategy perspective is really fostering new talent. So I would love to know, I think that there's a lot of various ways that companies go about doing it. One way is obviously like tapping into an accelerator program and looking at young entrepreneurs. I think to one of the underlying themes that we've talked about here in terms of diversification and actually tapping into those communities. Aside from being part of something like an accelerator program, how do you guys find that talent? I think it's been really hard for us to be able to. I think we know that in order for us to continue to be innovative, we have to invest in the youth and we have to give people a platform to come with those ideas. But we're coming from a different perspective. We're a company and we're an agency, but we recognize the need to empower, the next generation. So how are you guys finding talent, aside from starting your own organization?
Yeah, I would say, it's challenging, right? Like if you're specifically looking for like, more like high school, late high school, juniors and seniors that are gonna be looking for some type of internship opportunity, there's so many different schools and school districts that it's gotta be somewhat overwhelming to kind of navigate that, right? But I would seek out, schools first that kind of specialize. I know there's one school, the name's escaping me right now, but they actually have Augustus Hawkins School. They have a program called CDAGS. It's like a pilot school where the entire curriculum is game-based. So the students are learning like Unity game engine. They're getting like a lot of exposure to technology all the way through from 9th through 12, right? So I would start there. I would start at schools that are already having some type of special, program, and reach out to them, and then go from there. Any type of partnership that you could do that that kind of works with what your initiatives are already, and anything that you could do like on campus that ties into what they're doing, I think is the way to go.
Also, I think there's an emotionality to it, right? I think the one thing I've experienced in like speaking at college, I just spoke at PayPal's Intern Summit, and I find most common there's curiosity and there's confusion, right? It's like they're curious about like how the world works, how did you do this, how did that happen, and but then there's also like I'm in this program and this is what I studied, but I don't know if that's the thing that so you use the right word, which is empowerment, right? And I think there's just like a human-centered like conversation. I was even thinking about this before the panel started, was like changing up interview questions that aren't like the ones that we've been using for the last 20, 50, where do you expect to be in 5 years? I don't know, right? Like it's like I don't know where I'm going to be 5 years from now, like as a grown adult. So, changing up how you get to understand a candidate's concerns. I think things like, we didn't get into this, but like workplace expectations are changing. How a millennial or Gen Z is expecting an experience in the workplace may not match what you guys have built, right? Or you may be solving for the wrong problem. Like maybe it's not peanuts and snacks and kombucha on tap, right? It's some other thing that's going to be of value for me as a potential employee to go there. Student loans, right? Like that's a real, perk. So where are those other data points that we can uncover that like make sense for this new era or generation of employee? And I think that'll, and to my point, I was going to say, just going to places where those folks are gathered, right? Like an internship summit, a college, a fair. You've got these other places and kind of just talk and listen and sit down and grab lunch and, just kind of make it conversational and exploratory. And then I think you'll discover like what data points you need to hit.
Yeah. And I think in terms of what Dave just said, the cultural alignment internally, as much as you can, if there's anyone on your team already that represents that group that you would like to have more of, celebrate them and have an infrastructure around them that helps them succeed as much as you can, if not more than you can right now, and have them become your ambassadors, because they're going to be the people who actually bring people in. They're going to be your stars who attract others. And then outside, you've actually got the opportunity to connect with stars that haven't joined your org yet, but they can help you get there. So I think it's that personal connection and inviting people into your company for those events. Literally, we did a lot of that at BCG Digital Ventures, and a lot of our talent kind of efforts were focused on that, opening up to make sure people knew we exist and we stand for these things, and you have these opportunities, and here's people taking those opportunities. So I think that's a few of the principles, but I would love to talk to you specifically about how to help in that way.
So
one more quick
I'll
thing.
put a plug in for the role of a university in that. I think we talk about education often in terms of classes and frameworks and models and instructional methods, which is great. At the same time, experiential learning is really important, and it's a great way that corporations, for-profit organizations, can identify talent that's doing the thing that you need done in your organization, right? So a case competition, maker contest, a pitch fest, right? Folks pitching new ventures, stuff like that, where you can potentially partner with any number of schools here in Southern California, for example, UCLA, and have them potentially create a platform where you have a different avenue to connect with folks that are actually doing the things that are of interest to you. I bring that up because I'm often reminded when we talk about recruiting, I'm a recovering recruiter from Microsoft from a very long time ago, and I was really fortunate in the sense that Microsoft at that time was just when Microsoft launched Windows 3.1, and it was at a time when the economy was kind of soft when it came to employment, so I might as well have been Bruce Springsteen when I went to career fairs. But nevertheless, for the people that we wanted to find, the methodology that is most common, which is like you show up at such and such a conference and you set out a booth, or you go to a college campus and you give a presentation and so forth, that didn't always yield exactly the results we wanted to, for the same reason that, if you're in insurance, giving away an iPad to like get people to come to your seminar is not necessarily going to sell more insurance, right? In other words, you're attracting people not necessarily for the thing that you're offering, right? So when you start thinking about kind of the core experiences that really connect people to your organization, what's the brand, what's the culture, and so forth, and then you start thinking about, okay, so and what are the ways in which we differentiate ourselves in terms of the skills that we look for, and think about how you can curate experiences where people can demonstrate those skills and find a platform where you can basically connect those dots. It's another way to kind of sustainably start to have some sources of talent that are a little bit more reliable, and where internally the people making hiring decisions feel like they're getting a great opportunity to have access to that pool of talent too.
Yeah. I have one last thing. I think this is just an idea. I mean, you mentioned you guys run festivals, right? There's a group called Recess who used to do like EDM festivals, and then that would be one day. The next day would be like almost like a career fair. So if they had Steve Aoki or Paul Oakenfeld, like they would just book them for a room about this size, and 150 people got to go to that. So you've got a pool of eager, fans by the thousands, and you're like, look, we're accepting applications into our whatever youth employee accelerator, whatever you want to call it, and you've got a captured audience. Why not grab them for a 15-minute like speed dating on what it's like to work here? So I think that kind of those sorts of moves kind of speak to culture, and also, it's like I got a job because I went to a festival, right? That could be really a dope experience and story to tell.
Everything you guys have said has been incredible and completely applicable. One differentiation I do want to make, though, is I'm not necessarily talking about the next talent that we're hiring. I'm talking about actually making investments into them. So ideas that we're looking for. So when I said accelerator, and I apologize, more so, investment accelerators like YCOM, Techstars, things like that, because they're really the ones who are getting the ideas from those entrepreneurs. And yeah, of course, ideally we'd like to hire all those people because they're all doing great things. But it's more so getting those ideas. And I think that what I've found is that, like, for example, all four of you probably get those ideas, but that's all based off of your network and your community and people coming to you with an idea. We're actually an investor in Tubit as well. They face the same problem. Is like they put out like a beta night for people to submit their ideas. But you find that people really only come to you when you're connected to their network. And so I was, all of those things are great ideas, though, because if we did do something off of a festival where somebody could submit something, it's like when you have the opportunity to talk to the people who can actually invest in you. So all these were great. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
So my invitation is connect with our networks.
Yeah.
Talk to that man there, who's extremely well connected. It's funny because across LA, we were just talking about this before, there are a bunch of organizations that are really plugged in with and have in their DNA the goal of trying to empower and activate these underserved communities. And we're looking for resources and relationships so that there's a way for those people that we've identified to actually make that connection and so on. And so from that point of view, you have a bunch of amplifiers if you have an opportunity or something that's going on, and part of this is also trying to invest in those amplifiers so that when you have a thing, the word gets out and the right people show up.
I don't know how much time we have left, but I do want to make a couple of recommendations so that we can leave this place with energy and focus. A couple of people I do want to recognize before we leave.
Before you do that, just take the mic out. You don't have to stoop. There you go.
There are a couple of students in the audience, and that's an amazing thing because most of them are in classrooms right now. And I want to introduce one of them who's been with me for almost 2 years now. He's been one of the few people who've been at all of the conferences in town, at Digital Hollywood. Can't remember the other ones, but literally he's been there as a journalist, recording and interviewing people about how students can get not only familiar with how the cultures of those corporations will let people, I guess, not only intern and do apprenticeships, but what can they learn outside of the classroom to get better prepared to submit themselves. So I want to introduce one of these people. I also want to say that when we leave here, there is a organization that's set up right next to us called Minority Startups. Lael Alexander is also the person who gave us the Wi-Fi to stream this. We're streaming this live to a couple of classrooms. So again, if we can, we should walk over there because he is a person who's willing to make sure the energy from this room continues on.
You should have mentioned that before I said pornography. I didn't know there were students watching.
So again, I want to introduce to you one of our student mentees, Shoni.
No, look at me. No,
Shoni.
I messed him up.
You cracked him up already. It's too late.
Thank you, Kevin, so much for that introduction. You know, just listening to everything that you guys are about and everything that you guys are doing, it's very inspiring and eye-opening towards what the future holds and what the various possibilities are for students in the, especially in the media and tech field and entertainment field. You know, just coming here to this event and what I've learned just from being around Kevin for the past 2 years is that no matter how well what's the word? How well your ideas are refined. If there's no funding, if there's no backing, if you don't have the venues, if you don't have the right connections, it's not going to go anywhere. And at first, I didn't really get that. I thought all you needed was a really good idea, and you need to be able to execute it. That was very wrong. And as a student, I think that's very important because a lot of students that I work with all think it's just about having a good idea and just going with it until it works. Just grinding it down until you got nothing left, down to skin and bones, and hope that it works. And so one of the things I've learned on this journey is that what students really need are mentors and mentees such as yourself, which is why I think balance is such a great idea. And I think that, you know, as a student, one of the key things that needs to be brought about is an awareness of these opportunities, an awareness of an event like this, and giving them that exposure to actually get here. And I would have never learned about any of this if I had never met Kevin in that small conference room 2 years ago at SMC. So it's trying to figure out and create that platform to bring about that awareness so that they can even start their journey to learning what it really takes and what's really needed to get to you to here on this stage, to be able to talk about their experiences, how they got there, what career pathways that they're opening up for new people, just as you are now. So I guess one of the questions I sort of have would be how would you envision creating such a way to a platform similar to like how Balance is, but that would be able to stream and give out this awareness to students? Like, how would you go about giving them more awareness so that they can actually attempt to even go to events, go to venues, learn more? Like, well, how would you guys do that?
Well, I'll take a stab at it, and I know you guys have some great ideas as well. But one of the things that we want to do is partner with Kevin. That's going to happen, right? We want to set it up so that it's working through him and his infrastructure. Partner with Jay, we've partnered with Michelle. That's what we're about, is actually opening up these opportunities for all the folks who've built out infrastructure for the last several decades, and have them get amplified through us, right? And helping them with whether it's funding resources, but also just connecting to others in other cities that are doing the same thing. So we want that multiplier effect to happen through working with people who are actually already doing it. And you know, the way that you presented, we had a call, and I'm literally blown away by what you are doing and what you're going to do next. And so we want people like you to be involved as well. So that's a long way to say we're going to do it, right? We're going to do it through you guys.
That would be awesome.
I mean, look, I think it's all about relevance, right? I think, you know, organizations speak a language, and then your generation speaks a language, and sometimes there's a language gap. And so, you know, like I have a 14-year-old daughter, and you know, like when she finds out a Billie Eilish or a Tyler, the Creator, has like an entrepreneurial side to them, like then that becomes a little bit of conversational glue, right? So how do you, I think at a lot of events like this, you know, I've seen Kanye on the show floor of CES, right? You've got all these like, not necessarily celebrities, but just like adding that pop culture, the entertainment, that excitement value, you know, to the serious conversation. And I don't think that happens enough, or at least the right way, right, or in the best way possible. I've tried to do that with my show. I've got 230 plus episodes, and I've had everybody from Matt Barnes to Chameleonaire to Troy Carter to, a lot of different individuals on there. And we're not talking about like the flashy stuff. We're talking about like Matt Barnes runs an artificial intelligence investment fund. And like, to me, that's an exciting angle to be like, oh shit, that's a huge surprise. I didn't know that. So you talk about streaming the conversation. It's one thing to have us up here and like, who cares when it comes to, no offense, but to to your peers, I'll say that. But if you put us next to X, Y, and Z person or thing, or maybe there's Complex Con that's coming up in a few weeks, where you're starting to find like, you start to meld worlds. And I think I'm a big fan of connecting dots that don't belong together. And so you create these mashups and you get the best of both worlds. When Worlds Collide, volume 1.
Okay, so my first thing that I heard was that Kanye is not necessarily a celebrity. The second thing, you mentioned your show. Can you just shout out your podcast too, so folks know what it is?
Show's called Innovation Crush. I'd like to say it's a cross between Fast Company and The Daily Show, which I've been saying that for years, and we just kicked off a partnership with Fast Company earlier this year. So we do Fast Company Fridays on my show. But it's really just kind of focusing on individuals who are reimagining the world in some way. Most recently I had Tim Daly on, who's an actor who worked with the Obama administration to add the A to STEM, right? When it was a governmental initiative and it was an official thing, and they were like, STEM, STEM, STEM. And he was like, no, creativity on top of all that stuff, right? Like, let's not forget about creativity. Another guy by the name of Dallin Larson is probably the reason we all eat acai bowls. But he's a billionaire who just started like the first CBD, network marketing space. We talked about video games. I was going to make an anecdote about from Atari to where we are now. But Nolan Bushnell, who has been a guest on the show, and we mentioned 2-Bit Circus enough. Nolan's son, Nolan created Atari and Chuck E. Cheese and all these things. His son, Brent, started 2-Bit Circus. So I had an episode with both of them on, and we had this whole like father-son, like how do you raise an innovator? Like, so it's just like whatever angles I can find that are of interest. And we've partnered with everybody from the White House to South by Southwest to Cannes Lions in France. So to create content, do storytelling, and have fun doing it. Like I hope it's a fun show. As you can see, I'm a bit of a weirdo. So, but and those individuals become collaborators, and so I try to build an ecosystem around. It's not just I go in the studio and like publish the thing. It's I want to leverage people and activate them and give them a platform as well.
So I asked Chris to say that specifically because the issue is not so much like how do we create platforms. My hypothesis is that the platforms are out there, right? Yeah. The content is out there. People out there trying to break down the game and share their wisdom, but discovery becomes the issue. So what we need are people like you to help be vectors of distribution. How do we actually reach the people who need to hear that stuff, who aren't part of how many followers do you have?
750,000.
750,000. Had you heard of Innovation Crush before today?
Nope.
Right. So there's 750,000 people that are getting something that you are not. Right? But now you know that it's happening, and you need to help us better understand how we get that to the folks who need it the most.
Yeah, and one more thing I wanted to say about that, just being in education for a long time, students are so overwhelmed with just what they're doing. There's never been more content out there. I feel like if you really want to be effective, you got to get into the classroom. And I think also like a particular classroom, like if you, like context is so important. So I think there's the listening changes when, let's say you want to speak specifically about tech. If everybody in that classroom doesn't really have that interest, it's not going to be as effective a message that that gets across there in that classroom. Whereas if you have a club or if you have a particular class that's focused on that subject and then you make the announcement, it's going to have a different impact. So just distribution is really critical.
Innovation Crush.
Yep.
Okay.
Hi guys, I'm Dr. A.J. Johnson, friend of Kevin's, and I was telling him my first time coming to the convention center was '84 for a video convention, and they wouldn't let me in. me or my 3 Mexican friends. We had to call Channel 9 News, and this is where the Staples Center is now. That was North Hall. And for them to let us in, because back there was no internet. You just sent a postcard in, you got your registration, all that kind of thing. And what I try to tell young people is you have to understand how far we've come. And also, it's not just the technology and your skills and your talent and so forth. You have to know how to move amongst civilized people, speak the King's English, and be able to present yourself properly so you have opportunities. So I haven't been as successful communicating that as I'd like to be. I was wondering if you had any ideas about that, because one of my big opportunities, my brother and I had the whole 14th floor of the CNN building for 3 years because Keystone was giving us our own satellite channel, the Gospel Network. And the damn thing blew up. Galaxy 6 exploded. So I'm a caveman now compared to the technology we have. So I no longer have to think how we're going to do it. We know we can do it. There's so much technology. But what I'm finding is these kids in inner cities, they're still trapped in how to be able to function on both sides of the fence. I understand when when you're down in Compton, trust me, you need to have your head on the swivel. You have to know how to move amongst that. But when you're outside of that, above the 10 freeway, you have to know how to function that way too. So I think that's one of the most important components. It's not just, having the technology and so forth. You got to have the presence to be able to function. I work for everybody. But without being able to speak the King's English properly and move at that level, I wouldn't have been to 18 countries. I wouldn't have done all the things that I've done. So how do you communicate that to young people effectively?
I want to take a stab at this. I don't know if anybody got a chance to go to Yomo next door. You said you saw a bus load of kids getting on or getting off the bus. Well, there's about 14,000 kids that have been bused to Mobile World Congress for the last 3 days. And all of these kids were invited. They were bused with lunches. And it's a great big opportunity for a lot of these school districts, teachers, and parents who did not get their kids here. So there's an issue right now. We have to start at the earliest possible age to give these guys some idea, exposure, but also giving them the opportunity to understand dual consciousness. They got to learn how to survive, but they also have to learn how to thrive at the earliest possible age. So I want everybody to figure out what we can do to get better at giving these young people an opportunity to meet you folks so they understand how to do a firm handshake, look people in the eye, be able to answer questions or just say, I don't know. And a lot of them have no exposure of what to do outside of the classroom. So I want everybody to think about that as we start to try to build a constructed pipeline with those young people on the front end really learning how to be able to comport themselves.
The one thing I just want to add, just to turn that question 90 degrees, we live here in North America in a cultural environment where the most compelling entertainment experiences, the most interesting fashion, the most sought after music, etc., is not coming from people who traditionally spoke the Queen's English, right? So I wouldn't always assume that the kid from Compton needs to leave Compton at home to be successful in the world. I would say that there's a question around, we're really good at teaching our kids how to be independent, particularly when we come from disadvantaged situations, to get folks on their feet quickly. We're not so good at teaching our young people to be interdependent, right? Because the opportunities that these folks are talking about involve collaborating with a lot of people. And so how do you establish trust? How do you get other people to see the world the way you do? How do you communicate your vision? How do you motivate people? How do you keep people accountable, right? How do you share the value of the thing that you're creating equitably amongst the people who you've partnered with, right? Things like that that go to the question of leadership and about collaboration, right? We need to be just as much trying to help our young people understand how they can connect with the folks around them as it is trying to teach them to fit a model which, to be honest, from a pop culture perspective, is not necessarily the thing that people are chasing. right? I suspect that when people decide to do an endorsement deal with Kevin Hart or Kawhi Leonard or, fill in the blank, it's not because they speak the Queen's English, right? It's because they see something in them that connects to other folks.
Well, that's not what I'm saying exactly. What I am saying is being able to be on both sides of the fence and function. Because we took some kids up to Neverland Ranch once. They're throwing shit out the window and just acting a fool, right? And when they got to the Neverland, their eyes stretched and they were like, oh my God, they'd never seen anything that beautiful in their lives. Now, when we left there, they made sure that place looked just like it was when they got there. The beauty of that place transformed them, and they saw things differently. So I'm not saying leave your identity who you are and don't be that, I mean, look at Curtis Jackson and Jay-Z and everybody else. I'm not saying that. But those exceptions to the rule, I'm saying if I hadn't been able to speak the King's English, Keystone wouldn't have gave us the whole 14th floor to CNN building rent-free. They wouldn't have given us a satellite channel. And this is in 1991, where I'm still trying to get equipment from Amatron, and it takes me an hour, even though I got ID. And I get this white dude from Domino's to go in, no ID. He'll come out with the stuff in 15 minutes. You understand what I'm saying?
I understand.
So I'm saying being able to know when to turn it on and when to turn it off.
And what I'm saying, and what I'm suggesting is, in addition to that, it's also seeking allies and learning how to collaborate. Because maybe you can't walk in there speaking the way you speak, but you have an ally that'll walk in there for you and come out with the stuff that you need, right? And part of that is building authentic relationships that come from a place where you are grounded. You got to have values. The idea that you're just going to throw stuff all over somebody else's property, somebody needs to raise you right. But that should also be true when you're back home.
Oh, yeah,
right?
Certainly. But if they're not getting that back home is what I'm saying. They're not getting it.
Right.
That's all,
Right.
like he was
I got
saying
you.
about
I got
how
you. I
people
got you.
hire
Yeah.
you. They hire the people that they know,
Right.
that they're familiar with. Okay. But if they've already got a preconceived notion of how you are, and you know that, you have to create an opportunity for yourself to say, hey, I'm not what you saw on TV. Just give me a shot and get to know who who people are is all I'm saying.
No, I got you. I got you. And I
So
agree.
we're here, but just having that, you got to give people a chance. But you have to be compelled to give somebody a chance.
Right. That's right. That's right. We just need to hold. I'm suggesting that there's a larger ecosystem out there, and we should both provide our young people with motivation and instruction and some level of discipline and grit, and we should simultaneously be trying to hold the larger ecosystem accountable and find the allies out there who will collaborate with us, co-conspirators, and help and give them some lanes where they can actually open some doors to a kid who may at first glance look like a stereotype, but if they get a second and a third glance thanks to an ally, provide an opportunity for them, folks realize that they've got the package, right? We have to be self-reliant, but I'm saying it again, but we also got to be interdependent, and we got to teach our kids to be that too. Right? All right. So with that, we're way over time, so I'm going to thank what remains of my panel. And thank you guys for coming here. We really appreciate it.
And again, if you want to stay around, we're going to take a little bit of a guided tour over at the Minority Startup and meet Lyle Alexander.